Welcome, everybody. My name is Shae Sterrett. I'm so excited to welcome you here to Start Strong 2021. And here we are, day 4, our final workshop of the evening with Emily Bradley. I'm so excited to introduce you. I think many of you already know her. And I'm going to just keep on letting people in. It's so awesome to have this community and have this space. And she's going to be offering such a beautiful workshop tonight. But let me take a minute and introduce her. She is a writer, editor, a writing coach who lives in Southern New Hampshire. Her personal essays have been published in Magazine, Yankee Magazine, Fourth Genre Lifeline, the Northern New England Review, the anthologies, Voices of Breast Cancer and Voices of Caregiving, and her memoir, The Family Closet, is in progress. Emily has a BA from Brown University, an MFA in creative writing from the University of New Hampshire, and she's the former managing director of the graduate programs at the New Hampshire Institute of Art. She combines her academic, career, and teaching background to help people find their voice, transfer their story onto the page, and publish their narratives. So if you've been with us over the last couple of days, or if this is your first workshop with us, I just want to let you know that this is being recorded. So if you don't want to show up on Facebook or YouTube or a website someday, you can go ahead and turn your audio and video off. And then it's my pleasure to introduce you to Emily, and I'm going to let her take it away. So I'm going to stop my share, Emily. I'm going to make you a co-host, and then I'm going to spotlight you. And I just want to thank everybody who is joining us, whether you're on Zoom, whether you're on Facebook. If you have questions and you're on Facebook, know that I will be monitoring that throughout the workshop. And Emily, what is your preference as people have questions? Would you prefer to have them as they come or at the end?
I think at the end, I mean, if it's relevant during is fine, but I think at the end might help keep the flow going.
Okay, perfect. All right, great. So take it away. So good to have you here.
Awesome. Well, hello, everybody. I'm Emily Bradley. Shae, thank you for the beautiful, beautiful introduction. And I'm going to say a little bit about, I know a lot of you, some of you are loyalists, and I love you for being here. But I'm going to say a little bit about who I am besides what Shae said in a minute, but I want to start by actually putting a pen to paper. So if you have a journal, awesome. If you don't know, I'll just even if you want to type on your computer or your phone, just take out a pen and paper. And this is going to be our first journaling prompt of the night. So what I want you to do is write down on your piece of paper the stressors. I'm going to tell you what to do and just give you about a minute to do it. This is not a long exercise. But I want you to write down whatever stressors you carry into tonight. Obviously, the title of this workshop is Journaling Through Grief and Pain, but there are a lot of different kinds of grief. I know some of you have had really recent losses. Some of you have had not so recent losses, but feel really recent. But just take a minute to write down on the page whatever tension or stressors you bring into this. If something didn't go the way you wanted it to, if you've had a recent loss or a frustrating situation, just take a minute right now to jot all those down on a piece of paper. You can put them aside. We're going to circle back to them in a few minutes, but I have lit a candle and I want to start this experience with a moment of silence, because when we talk about grief and we talk about pain, people are in different stages. People are in really different stages. Some of you I know are in really very, very recent and fresh experiences. So I really want to honor the overwhelm and the pain that comes with sort of both states of suffering. So let's just start the meeting with a moment of silence and honor and hold space for all of the things that you wrote down on the pieces of paper. Because this tends to be a heavy topic, I also have some funny things in here too. So I promise this is not going to be all heavy, but it's important to honor what we bring into this. And I invite any of you at any stage, if this starts to be sad or overwhelming, to shut off your cameras and take whatever time and space you need to honor the experience that you have during this workshop. Just know that we are all sort of connected to each other, and we are all witnessing each other in sort of the conditions that we bring into this workshop. So anyway, I invite you to shut off your camera if you need to. And about halfway through the workshop, I'm going to do a PowerPoint, and I just want you to know that it's available on my website, which we can put in the chat box, but don't frantically write stuff down. I encourage you just to sort of listen from your heart, and you can reference all of the resources and everything afterwards. So I want to start by telling you who I am outside of what Shae said, because, our stories, if there's anything I've learned about grief, it's that we learn through stories and we heal through other people's stories. And certainly by releasing our own. And if there are 3 words that I want us to sort of keep coming back to tonight, it's that journaling helps us process, clarify, and release all of the emotions and all of the feelings that go into the condition of grieving and the condition of pain. So that's going to be our chorus, is process, clarify, and release. So I'm Emily Bradley, and my experience with grief started in my adolescence. Many of you know this, so I'm gonna, but I also see some faces I don't know. My mom was diagnosed with breast cancer when I was 13, which was something she had. She went in and out of remissions until I was 22 when she died. And about 3 months after my mom died, my dad came out of the closet. So I was at this sort of age, when you're at 22, when you're like half still a kid and like trying to be an adult. And, in addition to obviously the grief of losing a primary attachment and losing a parent, I was also grieving sort of the end of this era of my childhood. This idea of sort of deriving security from our nuclear unit was gone as far as I was concerned. And I have a really loving and close relationship with my dad, so it had nothing to do with that, And the reason I mention that is we grieve not only the loss of loved ones or the loss of pets, or anybody who we're close to. We think of that as bereavement, but there are other griefs that we carry, the loss of innocence, the loss of what we thought we were going to get in this life, the loss of a future that we expected and we're not going to get, and if we are suffer from chronic pain or even acute pain, just the grief that goes into, we wanted things to go a different way. We didn't ask for this, So there's this incredible book, this will be all on the list, called The Wild Edge of Sorrow by Frances Weller, who's a psychotherapist who talks about something called an apprenticeship with sorrow. And the concept behind it is that if we allow grief and pain to be our teachers, we can crack open to something even greater than what we knew before. And my recent experience with grief is that my family, and many of you on this call or on this Zoom, have lost 3 really, really close loved ones. My Aunt Kathy, who was my mother's sister, who kind of became my mom after my mom died from lung cancer in August. And then our dear Uncle Jeff, my husband's Uncle Jeff, who became my Uncle Jeff, died from tongue cancer in November. And then I have a 3-year-old daughter, Grace, her godmother and one of my greatest spiritual mentors and advisors died in December. So we're back in this season of the new kind of grief, when you check your phone and there's still a voicemail from the person who died. And the through line in all of this for me is that I've journaled through all of this. I have journals from my mom's illness, just from like being 13 years old and writing all of this stuff down. And I'm so grateful that I did, because the state of grief is also a state of overwhelm, right? We get paralyzed by the feeling of impending catastrophe. And when I look back at some of the things I journaled, I mean, it's just stuff I never would have remembered. And time sequences when you're grieving get off. And so to be able to reference those has been such a gift for me. And here's the promise that I love that came from this book. I'm going to read it to you and then I'll distill it into like a little nugget. But here's what Francis Weller says in this book. He tells us, "I'm not sure when I started my apprenticeship with sorrow. I do know that it was my gateway back into the breathing and animate world. It was through the dark waters of grief that I came to touch my unlived life, by at last unleashing tears that I had never shed for the losses in my world. Grief led me back into a world that was vivid and radiant. There is some strange intimacy between grief and aliveness, some sacred exchange between what seems unbearable and what is most exquisitely alive. Through this, I have come to have a lasting faith in grief." To me, it just is a promise. If we embrace this instead of run away from it, he talks in this book too about the two things we do when we're overwhelmed by grief is we have amnesia and anesthesia, right? We purposefully forget. It's too hard to lean into the feelings, so we ignore them, which is denial, right? We ignore them, or we anesthetize them. We use some whatever fills our void, whether it's food or alcohol or whatever it is. There are a lot of different things that we fill the void with. We either avoid amnesia or we anesthetize. And so this quote speaks to me of this promise of like, if we lean into this, there is so much to learn. Grief is our teacher. The first noble truth, right, of the Buddha is suffering exists. Like, we are going to suffer in this life. It's what we do with it. It's I'm sure many of you listened to the Amanda Gorman poem at the inauguration, but my favorite line that just like knocked me over was, "As we grieved, we grew." Right? We don't have to stop growing. We don't have to let our spirit stay stuck because we're grieving. And I mentioned my 3-year-old Grace, who is very near to and dear to many of you. I'm going to show you a picture of her. This is Grace with her. She and I have matching journals. Hers is pink, mine is yellow. And actually, I want to get that back. This recent loss for Grace of her godmother, Denise, was a really hard one because they spent a lot of time together and she loved her very much. And so in an effort to keep that memory alive, every morning, well, almost like not every morning, but a lot of mornings, we open up our journey books and she draws a picture. This is about which is like exactly what grief feels like, right? It's even better than representational art. Like, that is what it feels like when we're grieving, and then I open my book and write the story. And we just try to keep Denise's memory alive by doing that. But the point of me sharing that is that Grace accidentally calls them journey books. And I think it is the most brilliant, like, out of the mouth of babes thing I've ever heard, because is it not a journey through, remember, we're processing we're clarifying, and we're releasing by journaling. And it's a journey, right? It's not a destination. We don't arrive anywhere, but we have the willingness to walk through it and journey through it. So, and my best friend I was like being really heavy about the title of this workshop. And she said, why don't you just call it adult journaling, like adult coloring? And I was like, that's a good idea. So use whatever you need and speaks to you. You can use Grace's concept of a journey book or Julie's concept of adult journaling. But here's the, before we go into sort of the structure and the meat of it, here's the last quote I want to read to you from that book, because I think it speaks to how journaling can help us transcend the state of grief. Doesn't mean we're going to avoid it, but it can help us transform and transcend it. We must learn the art and the craft of grief, discover the profound ways it ripens and deepens us. While grief is an intense emotion, it is also a skill we develop through a prolonged walk with loss and life. Facing grief is hard work. It takes outrageous courage to face outrageous loss. Journaling can help us. So if there are two goals we have in this workshop, is that we come to see journaling as a tool that can help us heal, right? It's actually a tool and it's a skill we can learn. And my hope is that this jumpstarts some type of practice for whoever of you needs it, and that it plants some seeds for actually like how to do that. And the biggest hangups I hear, just a little note, the biggest hangups I hear about journaling are, there's this hang up about sort of the Dear Diary mentality, right? Like we picture our adolescent, like 11-year-old selves with the little diaries that had a key and a lock on them. I actually had one of those when I was a kid. I don't think I ever had the key, but I definitely had the little lock thing, and we sit down and we just don't know what to say. Like what do we write? So I hear a lot, I don't know where to start. I don't know what to say. I'm intimidated by this. By this process, because we have such an inner critic, right? We have to always be checking our urge to judge ourselves. We want it to be perfect. We want all the sentences to come out the right way. And really the whole intent is just we're processing, clarifying, and releasing through doing this work. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to talk about grief and pain. We're going to talk about the benefits of journaling and some techniques to get your pen moving. And then we're going to talk about the role of ritual, which is a sort of like sounds like a hocus pocus word when you hear it, right? But there's such importance to the art of releasing all of this stuff that we're putting onto the paper. So we're going to do another writing exercise. Get your pen out. And I'm going to share the screen to show you guys one image that is courtesy of my husband, because I am perpetually and terminally serious. And he told me to lighten up. He saw my power presentation and he was like, oh boy, we need a little levity here. So this is hold on, I'm going to share the screen here. Compliments, of Jeff. Does it, slideshow. So warning, this exercise has to do with feelings. So look back at what you wrote down at the beginning. And if anything else has popped up for you in this conversation, if anything, if you just didn't know what to write at first, go ahead, certainly pick something different. But for 2 minutes, I want you to write about this, how either this loss, whether it's a person or an expectation or whatever it is, or a situation, write about how this loss or the situation or this source of upset and distress to you makes you feel. So what emotions come up when you think about this situation? And if you have trouble naming those emotions, you can think about what sensations come up in your body. Like does it make you feel? How does it make you feel? And then what emotions do you associate with those sensations? So I'll chime my singing bowl after 2 minutes, but just journal for 2 minutes about how that situation makes you feel.
Emily, could you put that in the chat so that I could put it in Facebook?
The prompt.
Yeah, thank you.
So let's take a minute and talk about the similarity in the experience of grief and pain. Because no matter what situation anybody wrote down or whatever the feelings associated with it, one of the what unites all of our experiences, the reason we all showed up at 6:45 on a Saturday night, unless you just love me and you came anyway, which might be relevant to some of you, but the reason we all showed up is we all have pain, right? Like there's something that there's in both states, there's energy that lives inside of us that we don't want, right? There's uncomfortable energy with pain and there's uncomfortable energy with grief. Both of these things, both types of these energies need to be expressed. And often here is the hard one. And here's one of those like kind of tricky words, but it needs to be witnessed. And so often we resist having other people witness us in our vulnerability, that we isolate and don't share with others what it's like, because we can't imagine people understand what it's like to be, what it's like to be us. But in doing so, we're further isolating, we are further isolating ourselves and not allowing all of the emotions to come up to the surface. So one of the benefits of the journaling practice is we're witnessing it for ourselves, right? If we can't, in privacy, we don't have to actually show up into a community gathering, although I'm a big advocate of how I do think that makes us heal. But the privacy of that space really allows us to witness for ourselves what our experience is, because we're processing, clarifying, and releasing. Like that's the purpose of what we're doing when we journal. And so they both states need to be expressed, witnessed, and healed. Like nobody wants to stay in these uncomfortable places, right? In this amazing book, which is on the resource list, Finding Meaning by David Kessler. David Kessler was Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's protege and friend, and many years, well, that'll be in the presentation in a minute, but one of the things he talks about is just the incredible need to find meaning in our suffering and our grief. And he says in all of the counseling he's done, in all of the workshops that he's done with people who are grieving, the number one thing that they need to hear is this will not be forever. You will not always feel this bad. This too shall pass, as they say. There's a season for everything. And so I want to go back into telling a little bit more of a story. And I'm going to put up, share the screen and get back to a presentation here. Whoops. Do I want to play from? There's Jeff's feelings again. So, we already, I got to get rid of the chat box there. We talked about this even as we grieved, we grew. Like we can grow through this process. Oh, thank you, Jeff. So when Aunt Kathy was diagnosed as terminal, which was about 1.5 years ago, I was bereft. I mean, I just could not fathom how I was going to survive another mother wound. How, in the story, right, the narrative that plays in my head is all the women I love leave me. It's even gonna make me cry now, right? Like all the women I love leave me. And I was going through Facebook, like super upset about this idea that isn't true, but I had created in my head, and our feelings respond to our thoughts, right? So I was these things I'm thinking give me experiences in my body because I'm having emotions. Anyway, I was going through Facebook and I read this quote, and it just really hit home. It really just made sense of something for me. And so you guys can all see it, but it says, grief, I've learned, is really just love. Oops. It's all the love you want to give but cannot. All of that unspent love gathers in the corners of your eyes, the lump in your throat, and the hollow part of your chest. Grief is just love with no place to go. And if that's true, that grief is love, right? Like we grieve in proportion to how much we love. Like the greater the loss, the greater we love, the greater the loss, the greater the grief. And if grief is really love with no place to go, we can start by putting it on paper, right? Like we can give it a home. Weller in his book talks about the need for containment, right? Because grief is so overwhelming, it's so catastrophic. Someone very dear to me who's on this Zoom described it as an earthquake that you just never know if it's going to end, right? It's just like so overwhelming that we can contain it. The way we can contain it by putting it onto the paper. In that same period, I was listening to a sermon and the pastor said, don't waste your pain. And there was something so profound to me about that. Like, if I can derive purpose from my suffering and in the process help somebody else in doing so, it will have been worth it. That doesn't mean I like or want or condone any of the things that have happened to me or the losses that I have, but it means that because it has happened to me, right, a great stage of my healing, and I want to really, really mention here, I've had incredible therapists and mentors and people who have walked through me in the process of grieving. So I have not done this in isolation, but there was a very important part of my healing where I realized, like, this wasn't done to me, right? Like my mom didn't, she, like, suffering exists, cancer happens, she died, and it didn't happen to me, it happened to her. And I was gravely affected by that. But it's not, once we switch off of the egocentric view, right? Like, how does this affect me? Which is, of course, so natural. I spent a lot of years doing that, so seriously. But once we realize, like, bodies don't last forever. And we, and there's this wonderful 12th century poem that goes, 'tis a fearful thing to love what death can touch. Right? Like there's risk in love. There's risk inherent and implicit in love. We don't love without risk. And damn, it feels bad when we lose it. Like it feels really, really bad. So don't waste your pain. And going back to this book, he says that the simple truth is that great loss is wasted if we don't use it over time to discover what lies beyond great loss. Like there is a threshold. We will not always feel this bad if we lean into it and don't use sort of the amnesia and anesthesia that he talks about. So just really quickly, I'm sure everybody knows this, but I just wanted to review for if anybody doesn't. You know, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross put out these 5 stages of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. But in recent years, in grief theory, there's, you know, it's become very clear that it doesn't end with acceptance, that it is that we need to make meaning of this, right? And acceptance, again, just to be clear, acceptance does not mean we like what happened. It means we come to terms with the reality of the fact that it did happen. So what Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's protege just published this book, Finding Meaning, in 2019, so it's a recent thing. And he says, there's been this assumed finality about this 5th stage, acceptance, that Elizabeth and I never intended. Over the years, I came to realize there's a crucial 6th step to the healing process: meaning. It allows us to transform grief into something else, something rich and fulfilling. So, thank you, Jeff. Back to how this is relevant to journaling. I'm gonna kind of blow through these because this is the, like, not the well, it's interesting, but you guys can all reference the PowerPoint to look back at these slides. But some of the benefits of journaling we've been talking about are, it gives us meaning, right? It helps us process and make sense of our suffering. It helps us arrive at meaning. It's also a private and safe place to witness ourselves, because if we cannot witness ourselves, we are going to have trouble being witnessed in community. It clears away the emotional, overwhelming clutter. Some people call it meditating with a pen from a point of mindfulness. You know, it helps us arrive at the nugget, right? What we take in is a whole bunch of emotion to the journaling process. And often what we take out is the one thing that we really needed to see or feel the whole time. It facilitates self-awareness and reflection. We become more aware of our interior state. You know, as we reflect on ourselves, helps us track patterns. Often when I look back at my journals, it's like the same crap over and over and over again, right? That I'm like journaling about. So it helps us track our patterns. It boosts cognition, especially in moments of emotional overwhelm, right? It actually helps us like go back and comprehend what's going on, especially in sequencing, like when things happened. It reduces stress. There are a lot of scientific studies around the physiology of journaling and how it decreases blood pressure, just among other medicines. It helps us increase self-compassion, you know, to be kind to ourselves while suffering. The central question of self-compassion practice. Enter my other book. This is an amazing book, Self-Compassion by Kristen Neff. It'll be on the resource list. But she reminds us in this book that the central question of self-compassion in that practice is, what do we need? What do we need? What do we need to survive this loss? What do we need? And so often what we need is so unnameable, right? Like we can't, it's, what we need is to be kind to ourselves. What we need to do, you know, is recognize, investigate, allow, and nurture what's inside of us. But when people started talking to me about self-compassion, I was like, I am not going to be hugging myself. That is ridiculous. But the more I read about it, the more I truly believe that this is a huge benefit. And it externalizes our pain, right? Much theory around memoir writing is that when we experience trauma or loss or grief or pain, the process of externalizing, putting it onto paper, gets us away from what Francis Weller calls the recycling of grief in our head, right? The Jungian concept behind this is when we go through trauma, we compartmentalize and therefore avoid, which is an incredible strategy of the mind, right? Like for anybody who's witnessed really difficult things, we need that. But if we don't release it in some way, we recycle it in our mind. So it helps externalize that process. So this is my refrain. This is my chorus, right? What we're doing, the three things I think that are most relevant to this workshop is that journaling is going to allow us to process, journey through our emotions, going back to Grace's journey book, right? The definition of journey is to arrive somewhere different. So we begin somewhere and end somewhere, you know, and end somewhere else. We're clarifying, we're finding that nugget, finding that one thing that, you know, we couldn't get to with all of the clutter in our head, and we release it. You know, we have that catharsis in the letting go process. And it's hard, right? Like, I totally identify with this little kid. Like, that is not easy. Like, it's easy to talk about this, but it is not easy to do this. Oops. Okay, I'm not going to go through all of these because they'll be in the because I want to get to the writing. They'll be in the PowerPoint, but but there's a lot of different ways. This is the how, right? Here are some ideas. Here are some things that you can do. When we think about journaling, we think about the most typical is the stream of consciousness. Stream of consciousness is what I asked you to do when you wrote about your feelings. It's just don't stop the pen from moving. You know, just write it. Listing, you know, we don't always have to have things in prose form, right? In like sentences. I start and end my journaling practice with gratitude, because there's a subconscious reminder to me that everything is actually okay. There are a lot of other lists we can do. Morning pages is a concept by Julia Cameron, that we write out 3 longhand pages every morning. Every single morning you show up to the page. It's a daily practice. Google has some awesome prompts. I have some at the end of this PowerPoint you guys can access. You know, I'm using photo memories with Grace. I'm showing her a picture of her and Denise, or a picture of her and Aunt Kathy every morning, and we're writing a story about it. There are ekphrastic exercises. So put on a song that really speaks to you, right? And just let that be the inspiration, or a piece of art, or poetry, whatever. We can inventory our limiting beliefs, sort of those mental constraints that hold us back. We can write our own affirmation, all is well. I will not feel like this forever. Whatever it is, I am enough. Whatever it is that you need to believe in here. We can do meaning exercise. This is kind of a bigger can of worms, but meaning exercises, right? So what meaning, you know what I was talking about before, right? My mother's death happened to me. It happened to me. And then what is the new meaning? My mother died and it was hard for me, right? Like they're two, you know, the original meaning, the new meaning. And there's a languages and tongues exercise. This is one of my favorite. I was just talking about this with somebody today. This is completely within, I'm only sharing my belief structure. Everybody very much has their own. But I believe that behind the veil, people have crossed over, that they are able to communicate with us. So one of the things that I do is write sort of down how I believe that person is communicating with me. So Aunt Kathy comes to me in blue butterflies, right? Like in the most random places, I'll see a blue butterfly. But whatever it is you know, had in common with that person that shows up out of nowhere, you know, once we start actually writing these things down, my experience is that I have seen that these people are not gone. I am just with them differently. There's a lamplight exercise from the Buddha, right? Like if you light a lamp for someone else, it's also going to brighten your path. So what are you doing to help somebody else? How are you putting your grief into action? How are you doing service with your pain? Instagram, there's some awesome platforms. You can, you know, I actually have a anonymous pen named Instagram handle that I sort of share thoughts that I wouldn't want witnessed by the people that I know. So that is an anonymous way and also there are other people who give prompts on Instagram. So it can be a great resource. Doodling, writing a poem, writing a children's book. If you are in bereavement and have lost a loved one, writing a tribute to them, whether that be a photo tribute or just a tribute or obituary, can be really effective practice. David Kessler suggested acceptance inventory. What parts of this have you accepted and what parts have you not accepted? And he says, when you discover the parts you have not accepted, that's where your healing needs to come, right? Like if you have not accepted something you didn't say to somebody, those are the pieces that can bring you the most healing. Dr. Clarissa Estes talks about a soul vitamin, how writing our story is so important. Just write your story, like whatever it is. And Tara Brock, another self-compassion expert, talks about the process of RAIN. You guys can Google that, but it's basically recognizing, allowing, investigating, and nurturing. But the most effective journaling practice I have experienced for grief and for pain is letter writing. And I don't know what people are bringing into this workshop. And, if it is somebody who's died, you can write to them. To all of the losses I've experienced this year, I've written them letters. And I'll talk about how I release them in the rituals at the end. But you can write it to a past self, a future self, to your inner child, a sympathy letter, what you wish people had said to you during these processes. Like, what did you need to hear that you didn't hear from someone that's a source of resentment for you? So we're going to write a letter. And here is Jeff, my Jeff meme. I'm really serious. My bias when I heard self-compassion was like, it is a ridiculous thing for people other than me. But I am now a believer. And so we're going to do it. I realize this might give some of you the heebie-jeebies, but that's exactly the point of why we're here. Okay, so I'm going to read this prompt to you, but basically to the extent that you can listen to it from your heart, I encourage you to do that, because really what we're doing here is we're going to take 5 minutes, and I want everybody to write a letter to yourself from somebody you love very, very much. Like that's an unconditional, and somebody who's unconditionally loving, non-judgmental, and compassionate. When I did this, I did Aunt Kathy, because she was just, oh, wait a minute, hold on. Here's my Aunt Kathy picture. Well, I am very pregnant in that picture, but Aunt Kathy was just like the eternal mother. And so if this person were writing you a letter, so I wrote, Dear Emily, right? If Aunt Kathy were writing me a letter, what would she say to me about my grief or pain, right? And how would she suggest I show myself compassion? What would she say, or this person that you're going to write it to remind you to be kind to yourself? And how would this person suggest you forgive yourself or someone or something else? Where do you need to forgive? And if this friend would suggest making changes, which she might or might not, how would these suggestions embody feelings of unconditional love? Just imagine the most loving, wonderful person writing you a letter, telling you what you need to hear. And if you don't have a person like that, or you can't think of a person like that, and I will say this exercise is particularly effective if it is somebody who you have lost and has crossed over, and if that is somebody that you associate with being loving and kind and compassionate. So for example, I wrote mine from Aunt Kathy. It's particularly effective to do that. It's also hard. So you might, here are some other choices. If somebody just doesn't pop into your mind, you can pick Mr. Rogers, the Dalai Lama, Mother Teresa, just somebody who really makes you feel all of those things. So I'm going to give you, take out your journal again, and this is going to be a longer exercise. We're going to do it for 5 minutes. You might not finish the letter, and that's actually okay, because it will give you your first thing to do tomorrow. But I want you to get pretty far into it, as far into it as you can. So write yourself a letter. I'm going to mute, and I will ding the singing bowl in 5 minutes.
Emily, can you go back a slide so we can read what to write?
And I also put it in the chat.
I don't want to dive right back into content. It feels important to hold the space with a little bit of silence, because that can be an incredibly impactful experience. So we're going to honor it with just a minute of silence. I hope that people took away from that what they needed to, and I invite you to finish it tomorrow or tonight if you didn't finish it. You know, and for me, the experience, because I did this exercise, I've done it many times, but I did this, but the experience for me was just, it was twofold, right? It was both incredibly comforting and also incredibly difficult. So if you're having two experiences, that was very much the experience that I had also. And the thing I want to say is in the normal workshops that I do, we would have time for sharing. We don't today have time to share, but if this were a longer workshop, I would really have loved to be able to hear what people's, either have people read their letters, or many people don't want to do that. And I totally respect that. Just hear what your experiences were. So if you feel so inspired to reach out to me via email, I would love to hear that, but we won't be able to do that in this workshop. I just want to draw attention. We're going to talk about ritual next, and I'm going to take the PowerPoint down. But these are these are the resources, just online resources, and then all of the books I've referenced are listed here, so that you guys, can look back if you're interested in doing that. Oh my God, and my inner English MLA teacher actually did the citations on this, so there are your citations. Yeah, and the thing I wanted to mention before we talk about ritual is I am going to run a 4-week workshop around grief, most specifically around bereavement. So somebody who's lost somebody, and we're going to do in the framework of that, depending on how many people there are, it'll be 4 or 6 weeks. We'll do some of the exercises that we talked about, but weren't able to actually do, like tribute writing, etc. So if that's of interest to you, it'll run in March, and just send me an email. I can share with you more information about that. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. Oops. Hold on. Did I stop? No, I didn't stop sharing. Hold on. It keeps going away. I'm having a little technical difficulty here.
Let me know if you need any support. Oh, there you go.
Okay, there we go. There we go. It kept how sometimes your mouse won't click on it. Okay, so I want to take the last 5 minutes of the workshop and leave 2 minutes for questions, but to talk about ritual. And this to me is such an important part of this. And like I said, I use the word hocus pocus, phrase hocus pocus at the beginning, and I totally thought that's what it was when people primarily. I work with a really amazing grief trained therapist who really recommended the practice of ritual. And I was thought it was for witches at first. And now I am a witch. So I'm in. I have the feathers and the rattles. I have it all. So anyway, it might feel silly. What I'm inviting the experience is if you hear this word and it feels outrageous, I was totally there, but I've also been converted. So let's just define and talk about what a ritual is, so we're on the same page. It's an intentional ceremony or a gesture, something you do that connects us to something beyond ourselves. So something to another realm, be it whatever power you consider greater than yourself, be it, I don't even want to name them, whatever power you consider greater than yourself, it helps connect us to that, often for the purpose of healing and transformation. Ritual has been called a language older than words. So in our journaling practice, right, we're relying on words, but words are also constraining sometimes. Like we can't articulate what we feel. It doesn't come out right, all those things. So in ritual, we can just honor the felt experiences of what we're going through. Weller in his The Wild Edge of Sorrow book talks about it as suturing the tears in our soul, that ritual can suture the tears in our soul. And he makes a very big case for grieving in community and talks about some African cultures in their bereavement and funeral ceremonies believe that we can't cross to the next realm unless on a river of tears. So people gather together for these like 3-day ceremonies where everybody cries in community in order to usher them to their ancestors in another realm. So anyway, that's just like an interesting fact I thought I'd put in there. But what is incredibly important to me in ritual around journaling is creating a sacred space to journal. And for me, so much of grief, which we've talked about, again, is just this overwhelming and pain, this overwhelming experience that to control the things that we can gives us tremendous sense of security, right? And what we can control is ourselves and where we sit down to journal. So I have created a space that feels incredibly safe and sacred to me. And it can be really, really simple. Like I actually printed out a picture for you guys to see. This is the extent of my sacred space, right? I have a candle. It is actually this candle that I have lit for you. It's in a significant bowl to me. And I light the candle every time I start journaling. And it gives me a sense of entering a sacred space. The other ways that I do this, and a lot of people create sacred space, is through altar making. You can make an altar just, by just putting significant things that are significant to you. I'm going to actually show you under the petticoats here. This is my altar for this experience, right? And so whatever is meaningful to you, right? Like whatever connects you to somebody, whatever connects you to whatever's beyond you, create a space around you. Also recognize your biorhythm. At what point in the day are you best journaling? I am for sure a morning person. I am toast, like crispy toast after 7 p.m. But that's not true for everybody. So find out what time of day this works best for you. Think about whether you're a silence background. Are you a silence or a music person? What helps you get into the zone? And what tools, what implements are you using? I actually have a special pen that I use, which is like a feather pen. Is there an implement or a tool that can connect you, right? If we derive security from a sense of control, we can control what pen we use. We can control what journal we have. Like buy one that really feels good. Like really get control over what tools you are using, because this is a practice. And if you want to, I have a grief journal. I have specifically I have journals for different purposes, but I have a grief journal. So if that's something that speaks to you, you could certainly do that. And finally, release rituals. Like how we now have all this stuff on paper. What do we do with it? Especially the letters, especially when we're writing to somebody who's departed and we are not going to be able to give them. I'm going to share 3 ideas with you, but I have about a bazillion. The first is I call it a God box. I'll show you mine. It's literally a box with a picture on top. And inside of it are 1,000 little pieces of paper. Some people call it a spirit well. Some people call it a worry jar. Some people, I don't care if you call it a brown bag, like whatever. The point is give your letter or rip the piece of your paper out of your journal and put it somewhere to even further externalize. It's really a practice of surrendering it, right? Like it's a practice of giving it over and letting it go, a letting go jar. And I burn, this is the witchy part. I burn my letters via, I go into the woods and I make a campfire, to be really honest with you, but I've also burned in a candle. There's this awesome stuff called flying wish paper that you can buy, and you can just write whatever sentiment, whatever nugget you got in your journaling practice. I burn resentments. You can do on this, and you light it and it like goes up like into the air. It's a very cool thing. And finally, burying. You can bury pages or pages, or your letter. And what I find most significant or sort of transformative about the burying is burying it with seeds, some type of plant seeds, so that we are not just putting it to rest, but we are also transforming it into something new, something that grows, something that has life. We are putting the energy back into the world, into the karmic cycles that we experience, through this. So with that, it's 7:45 on the dot. I'm going to show you how I end my journaling practice, which is like this. The process of bookending is quite helpful to me. So anyway, thank you to everybody who came. I can certainly stick around for questions, but it is 7:45, so I want to honor those who need to move on with their day. But Shae, thank you for facilitating this, and thank you to everybody for coming.
Wow, I don't even know where the last hour went. That workshop just was so rich, and it also, just the synergy throughout these last couple of days is just amazing, talking about self-compassion and, taking our suffering and trying to transform it into something and see the deeper meaning in that. So thank you so much for bringing this work to this group of people, many of which I know are already familiar with you and obviously love you. But I just feel so blessed to have you be a part of this experience and for, giving up your time to be here. Thank you so much.
It's really an honor. I'm very, very grateful.
And thank you so much for everybody who joined us, whether you're on Zoom or Facebook. Thank you so much for being with us in community this evening, and especially around a topic like this that can, it can be so raw for some people and even so lingering for people. Just grief, like you said, is such an interesting emotion and so complex. So we will be back here tomorrow for the final day of Start Strong. So please join us. And with that, I just bid you adieu. Have a great evening. Thank you for being here. And Emily, thank you to you.
Thank you so much. I just want to say very briefly, I'm putting it in the chat, but anybody who wants to access the PowerPoint with the resources, etc., I put my website in the chat box, and it's under, you have to go to my events page, and this event is listed, and you can download the PowerPoint.
And I also put it in the Facebook group.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. Full disclosure, I need to swap it out because Jeff gave me the memes idea at like 6 p.m. when I was in a frantic spin, which is the most Jeff thing that's ever happened. So I need to upload the newest version, but it will be done within an hour.
Wonderful. Well, everybody take care, and thank you for being here.